What we're going to look at next is incorporating the wheels and the tracks underneath the tank, as well as introducing a new tool, which is a different way we can shape our 3D models, and that will be called Deformers. So we're on to the last modelling section of creating our full 3D model, and to do this, we're going to create and to start off our wheel and track section, we're going to use cylinders. So I'm going to go to the top left hand corner and create a cylinder. Let's move this up and I'm going to rotate it, and I'm going to hold down J while I'm rotating so it snaps to different increments, and we'll scale this down to match the size of the tank. Now I am going to need 2 of these cylinders in this orientation. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate this cylinder. The way that I'm going to do that is just hold down Shift. Make sure, first of all, before I do that, make sure I'm in the Move tool. So if I'm not, I just press W. I should be seeing these arrows. Once I've done that, I'm going to hold down Shift, and I'm just going to drag out another copy of the original object. So now I've got 2. I'll set one aside for now. The first we're going to look at is creating the tracks. So I'm just going to kind of move my camera around to the front view and just scale it up to match the width of these wheel arch sections, and just make sure that we're approximately the right size. Perhaps we'll go a tiny bit bigger and see how much we want them to be sticking out. I think that looks about right. I'm just going to move it over to this section. I'm going to go to face, and what we want to do here is delete both caps. So both sides, we want to delete all the faces from both sides. So to do this, I'm going to go into my side view. So spacebar to come out into where we've got our 4 sections. I'm going to hover over the side view, you can see here, and I'm just going to press spacebar again, and we'll focus in on our object to zoom in a little bit closer. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to draw a cube, making sure not to get close to the edges because we want to keep the edges. And I'm just going to delete. So what we're left with now is a single layer that we can use to form the base of our track. So I'm going to go back into the side view and go into vertex selection mode. And I'm going to select all of the vertex beyond halfway of the object. I'm going to move these back, scale them down, and also move them down. I want to try and get like a flat bottom part of the belt. I move down like this, and I think that looks about right. So I'm going to go back into object mode, and I'm just going to see how that looks against the tank, and just see if we need to make any more adjustments. So maybe we could make it a slightly bit thicker. Apart from that, I think that's looking okay. So the next thing we're going to do is just make this into a 3D form. At the moment, we've only got one layer, and you can see that it's a dark in the middle, which means this is kind of like the inside of the object. So we need to add a little bit of thickness for this. To do this, we're going to go back and use our extrude tool. So I'm going to click on the object and go to extrude. And we're going to add some thickness. So this is probably too much. 0.1 is probably a bit too much. So I'm going to click on this little circle a couple of times until we get kind of like a little, it looks like a little slice of pie. And that means we can make finer adjustments. So I'm just going to drag that in until we have a nice thin belt. And I'm going to make sure to turn this back up to, so just click on it twice so you get that shape again. And now we've added some thickness to our belt. The last thing we need to do for this is just to bevel our edges, otherwise the edges are a bit too sharp. So we'll just go into edge mode, click on all of the edges that we want to bevel, and just double clicking to select the whole loop of edges. And then once I've done that, I'm just going to go to bevel and just refine that. Probably just need one, I think. It's fairly hidden. And that will do for our belt section. So we have our belt section. Now we need to create the wheels that will go inside the belt section. And that's where we come to our other shape that we duplicated earlier. So I'm going to leave it at approximately this thickness, because approximately this thickness. And this time I'm going to select the faces. I'm going to go to face. I'm going to hold down tab and just drag a circle round to select all of those front faces. And then I'm going to go to extrude again, switch to my scale tool and scale down. It will create like a little bit of a lip for our wheel. And then I'm going to extrude again. This time I'm going to move the faces back so we create a little bit of an indent. I'm going to extrude once more. This time I'm going to scale down to about there. Extrude once more. I'm going to press W this time and move the faces out. Once more, extrude and scale this time. Extrude again, scale a little bit more, and I want to create a little bit of a outer circle here, so a thin outer circle, like this. And then I'm going to go back into face mode, make sure I'm in face mode, and I'm going to select this circle. So I've just clicked on one section and double clicked, and go to the next section and the next face and the last face and double click whilst holding down shift. And I'm going to extrude this, press my W to go to my move tool, and then just create this little indent here. Okay, so we have our basic wheel shape. So I'm going to select all the edges that I would like to bevel. So I'm just going to select these main edges that are going to be visible. Double clicking to select the whole of the edge loop. And once I've done that, I'm just going to go to bevel. We'll add an additional segment in there. And we have our wheel. So now we're going to start to line up our wheels inside of the belt. So I'm going to move this over here. And the first thing I want to do is just scale my object out so that it matches the thickness of the belt. and just place the first wheel right at the front of the belt. If I wanted to be more accurate, I could also switch into my my side view as well. And then I'm just going to duplicate this wheel, so holding down Shift while I have the move tool activated and just moving one out like this. And this one I'm going to scale down, so we're kind of reusing the wheel at so that we can be efficient. Okay, so I'm going to pause the video now and just lay out the rest of these wheels. You can choose to do it how you want. Remember, we have a little bit of freedom because we are working with a stylized tank. I've laid out my wheels now, and the next task is to get it to fit in underneath the tank there. Actually, I'll just move this back a little bit in those. Okay. So the first thing I'm going to do, just to make it a little bit easier to move around, I just want to combine all of these different models into one object. So I'm going to select all of them. So I'm just going to click and drag in the viewport, select, make sure I've got all of them selected. And I'm going to go up here and go to Mesh and Combine. Now when we click on the object, it's all as one object. We can move this around without any issues. So I'm going to move this to where it would be underneath the tank. And one thing you might notice is that our tank has a slight curve at the bottom and the wheels don't. So what I'd like to do is add a little bit of a nice curve to our wheel section. I've just noticed that this bit is sticking out, so I'm going to really quickly fix that. So we're going to use a deformer called Bend. And to use that, we're going to click on the object, go up to this top menu here and go to Deform. Go down to Non-Linear and click on Bend. Once we've done that, if we go into the attribute editor, so it's right next to the modeling toolkit, we're going to click on the attribute editor tab, and this will give us the options that come with our Bend deformer. Now it pretty much does what it says on the tin. So if I add some curvature to this, you can see it's bending the object. Now at the moment it's not quite bending the object the way we'd like it to. And what that means is we just need to move or rotate the deformer around so that it's activating on the right axis. So I'm going to click on the deformer just in the viewport. So that's just this long line here. And then I'm going to use my rotate tool, and I'm just going to move it round until it's approximately in the right orientation. And once I've done that, I can then use the bend to create the kind of bend that I'd like for it to have. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move the object underneath the tank so that I can actually see the shape that I'm looking to achieve. Oh, sorry. I just need to make sure I move everything at the same time, not just the object. So I'm going to click and drag select. That means I've got the bender deformer as well. I'm going to move it underneath the tank to where I'd like it to be. And from there, I can add the correct amount of curvature that I need to follow the shape of the tank. We don't need too much. And I think what would be helpful here is if we rotated the object a little bit as well. So once I'm done with the bend deformer. So I've got a slight bend in my belt, which I'm happy with. I can go to Edit, Delete by Type, and History. And what that does is it just applies that bend to the object. And then what I'm going to do is just manually rotate it around so that it doesn't stick out of the object and it follows a nice curve shape. Let's move it back a little bit. Now the last thing we need to do for the wheels is just to mirror it across to the other side of the object. And to do this, I'm just going to duplicate the way we did before, so holding down Shift and cloning it. And then with our cloned object, within the attribute editor, I'm just going to click on the first tab and I'm going to go down to Scale, and I'm just going to put a -1 in the first box. We just put -1 in the first box, and that will mirror the object across for us. And all we need to do now is just move it into the correct place. Rotate it a little bit. Okay. To finish off this section, we're going to look at another deformer that we can use to really push the stylization of our tank model. So we'll start off with the gun section before moving on to the full object, just to demonstrate how this deformer works. So I'm going to go back to my deform menu and go to our non-linear deformers and select this time onto flare. We'll head back into our attribute editor. Inside of the attribute editor, we have these options that we can use, and this basically just gives us a little bit of freedom to uniformly change the shape of different sections of our model. So we've got the first section, which is the start flare, so we can stretch that out in the X or the Y axis. We can squash it down. We've also got control over the midsection, so we can add like a little bit of a sort of curve in that midsection, whether it tapers in or out. So we'll have it taper in a little bit. Then finally, with our end flare, we can control this end section here. It basically just gives us a little bit of control over the overall shape of the model. And if we're working with something that's cartooned and stylized, this can be really helpful to get those exaggerated shapes. So just like our wheels, once we're finished with the deformer tool, we're going to go to Edit, Delete by Type, and History. And that's just to apply that deformer to the object. And what we're going to do next is select the whole object. So I'm just going to click and drag, making sure all of the object is selected. And I'm going to go to Mesh and then Combine. Once that's combined, we can actually use that same deformer, but this time on the object as a whole. So if I go to Deform, Non-Linear, and Flare. So in this instance, we just need to rotate the deformer around so that it matches the orientation of the object. And then we can start to play around with the overall shape and form of the object itself. So this is where we can play around and see if we can create a slightly unique shape. I'll let you have a go at doing this and create your own interpretation of a stylized tank using this deformer. And then of course, once we're finished with our edits, so if I add a little bit of a curve there, maybe an end flare. Oh. Okay, so once we're finished with our edits, just make sure you go to select the object, go to Edit, Delete by Type, and History. And here I've kind of created like a little bit of a rotation down, so I'm just going to rotate it up so that it's still flat on the ground.